And I'm Joshua Shaddox. This is History US 530 discussion board post number 4 for Liberty University. We were asked this week to discuss an issue of modern or late 20th century American Christianity. I chose to tackle the topic of ecumenicalism, which is essentially promoting unity among Christians, which I thought was a pretty interesting discussion that Noel brings up late in his book because everything we know about the split between Catholics and Protestants comes from Martin Luther. And of course, if we know our history, the Reformation period was when Luther decided that he disagreed with the Pope and his rules, and he pounded 95 Theses into the door of his church in Wittenberg, and that sparked a fragmentation of belief systems. Of course, in his um, treatises, these ones were from 1521, but it started in 1517, and there was a lot of paperwork that was going on. I bring all this up because that really started the divide and the fracturing, and all of that stuff that happened back then turned into what we know today as the denominations that we see. And this is just a book, the 13th edition of the denominations in America or in the United States. And so we have a lot of that. We have hundreds and hundreds of denominations, and it all started way back in the Reformation. In the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, we studied the discussion of fundamentalism and modernism, this need to clarify fundamental doctrines because of what they felt was a slipping away of what it really meant to be a Christian and trying to cement the faith. And that leads us to what we are talking about in this week with the ecumenicalism that I was looking into, because what we've gone from is this shift to separate ourselves and divide ourselves, and the creation of all these different denominations for the last 400 years to now. In the recent decades, we've been trying to bring the body of Christ back together. We've tried to find ways to reconcile believers, to reconcile different denominations and different groups. So even though we seem like we've created hundreds of denominations, there's a desire for unity, and I think that's pretty awesome in a sense, because that desire of working together, agreement and cooperation. Interestingly enough, in the last several decades, there's been a huge rise of non-denominational churches instead of specific denominations. And I was surprised that Noel didn't really touch on that and didn't seem to approach that. But there's a plea for cooperation and for unity, and I think that's important in Christianity, and it's a change that's been shifting. Another one that I really was surprised about is the reconciliation between Catholics and Protestants, and that began during the 1960s. Of course, the Second Vatican Council, the election of John F. Kennedy as president, and things like that. Because while we maybe don't realize it in our day and age, up until Kennedy was elected, the post World War II mindset was still very anti-Catholic, and there was still this huge rift, again going back all the way to Martin Luther. And yet you can see that the Lutheran churches are very closely aligned to Catholic doctrine in the modern era. So it's just very interesting to see that all coming about and that happening. There's two things I think on this. There's a good and a bad that I think needs to be pointed out. Obviously, the good is the unity, the common goals, the advancement of the gospel, and the reaching people for Jesus Christ, and the stopping the fighting, stopping the bloodshed. If you read anything about the Reformation, if you've studied the Reformation, some of the worst and most violent times in life were religious fighting, and especially Protestants killing other Protestants as much as they killed Catholics, sadly. And so I think all of those things are positives here, but like the fundamentalists of the turn of the last century, I have to question doctrine and the delusion of truth and compromise, and we have to be careful to protect that. So Let me know what you think. I'm looking forward to your responses. Thank you very much.